This field near Diss in East Anglia, well, it may look like any other field, but over a number of years, metal detectorist Tom Lucky has found some amazing finds scattered across its surface, including a truly extraordinary Anglo-Saxon pendant. And it was found in the grave of a high-status female burial excavated by Helen back in 2015. The excavation left some unanswered questions. Who was this Anglo-Saxon lady? Why was she buried here? And were there other burials in this landscape? And Helen has brought Time Team back to this fascinating site to see if we can find answers to any of these questions. And of course, we've got just 3 days to do it. The Winfarthing Lady is one of a number of 7th century high-status female burials in East Anglia. It's not far from Sutton Hoo, where the famous ship burial was found, packed with treasures. The pendant has striking similarities with some of the jewels found at Sutton Hoo, and its discovery was a moment that Tom will never forget.
Yeah, I remember sort of the top of the skull appearing, and then I think it must have been after lunch we came on the field, and I think I turned away to go and sort something out for a few minutes, and just sort of heard yourself or one of the others sort of make this sort of noise of excitement, and looked back and this sort of piece of golden garnet was just sort of appearing out the soil. You don't think that you're ever going to sort of like find or see anything coming out the ground that's quite so spectacular. I do remember when, like after that first bit of pendant appeared, and sort of Stephen just peeled a bit more off, and those interlaced serpents appeared in the garnets. And that was the point where we sort of, I think, knew we had a serious sort of piece of jewellery on our hands.
The pendant was just one of a number of fascinating grave goods placed around the burial. They're housed at Norwich Castle Museum, and they're too valuable to travel. So Bear has scanned them to place them into a virtual museum so we can examine them on site, because each one could be a valuable clue to help us uncover the story of the Winfarthing woman. Helen, this is a site of some national importance.
Well, certainly the pendant that she was wearing, which was an immense surprise, but it's an immense pendant, is of international importance. It's important on a European scale.
Wow.
And it's an extraordinary object that is going to be in exhibitions, in travelling exhibitions, going to be lent everywhere for decades. Everybody's going to know the Winfarthing pendant.
And she wasn't found on her own, is that correct?
No, she wasn't, that's right. And that's where Joe comes in, Joe Carruth, who's an old friend of mine, who is probably the best early Anglo-Saxon cemetery excavator.
So Joe, what can we expect from this site?
Well, the first thing that I'm interested in is actually looking at this grave again. So you can see from what we can see on this plan here that they only excavated a little bit beyond the actual grave pit itself. Now, one of the first things I'd be interested in looking at is you would expect, or you might expect with a burial of this kind of status, that she would have been covered with a mound in order to make her stand out amongst all the other burials. So the first thing I'd like to do, I think it would be great to open up a much bigger area and see if we can find evidence of that mound, which we might see as a ring ditch going round. I might expect it to be about 4 metres across, probably would be about sort of typical for the period. So that's something I think would be really interesting to look
definitely.
at. And then we can see whether, we might see whether that ring ditch was cut through other burials, so that whether she's actually imposed onto an earlier cemetery or whether she's in a space of her own, and we can see how she lies in relation to other burials.
And how are we going to relocate it?
We've got a problem, and the problem is the trench was recorded with a handheld GPS, not a sophisticated GPS. So we don't actually know where the burial is, except for being approximately within an area. So the only thing we can try to find is the disturbance from the excavation. So it's a bit of a long shot.
We seem to have a lot of data, but none of it quite matches up. So Stuart's going to have a go at the old-fashioned method of lining up trees for excavation.
You're joking.
And we will get there. It's just that it's not as easy as we had first
It's never
thought.
as easy as we first thought. Well, good luck with that. Relocating the grave could be like looking for a needle in a haystack. All of Tom's finds and the previous geophys were plotted using the old equipment. And to add to the confusion, although the burial's marked as being to the north of the ditch on the geophys, both Tom and Helen believe it was to the south. But we're hoping John's new geophys will help us tie all the data together.
With this photograph, as you can see, there are still trees which we can still identify and relationships.
But just in case, Stuart and Tom are using a different tactic to try to relocate the previous excavation.
As well, I think we can probably get you roughly in that position again using the photographs.
We're hoping that this method will confirm which GPS point was accurate.
It's aligning those two bushes with that tree,
Yeah.
isn't it? And just having that tree on the inside.
That's right. Well, the second key angle is that bush on the right and the tree behind, which only
Yeah.
works if you're a bit further this
Here.
way at the moment.
Yeah.
It appears evidence from the photographs bears little relation to the GPS point from the burial.
Where's your peg, Henry?
Well, I'm back here. That's
I find out I've got red on green colourblind. That's okay.
probably red pegs in green fields. So we're at least 20 metres off.
Yeah, I mean, Tom is fairly close to where this visual indicator of where the trench was.
But Tom and Stuart's survey does seem to tie in with John's new geophys.
Okay, folks. Oh, here we go.
And he thinks he's found something.
We've relocated the ditch quite clearly, and that's the so-called medieval ditch.
Yes.
And everybody said it was south of that.
Yes, exactly.
So we've plotted where that is.
Looks good.
Now, on the geophysics, these are really at the limits of our instruments. Okay, so I'm reading quite a bit into it, but I think that white square there could well be indicative of the trench. The fact it's so close to the recorded spot, we've got nothing else to go on at the moment. I think we need to put a trench on that just to, well, establish if that is the old excavation trench.
Nothing else to go on sounds, a bit depressing, but that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, that looks like you've solved it.
So with time ticking, Matt's keen to get digging.
John, bring your digger over here.
And by late morning, Trench 1 is underway.
It's not too dry, which is good.
Yeah, that's actually not so bad, is it?
No,
I thought
it's
it might
not.
break up loads. but
No,
really
no,
plain.
it's
That's
got
quite
enough.
nice, isn't it?
It's got enough sort of
Yeah.
crumble in it, hasn't it?
Can you manage that last couple of feet at the end?
Our mission here is to find out as much as we can about this burial. Why was she buried here? Was she buried within a cemetery? And where might she have lived? So we're looking for signs of a 7th century settlement in Winfarthing itself.
Thank you ever so much for volunteering. I'm Carenza Lewis. I'm one of the archaeologists on Time Team. And
So we've enlisted the help of the local historical and archaeological societies to investigate the village of Winfarthing itself.
we know that the church is broadly 13th, 14th century. It's got some earlier features, but that's only taking us back into the 11th century, perhaps at the earliest. That's all several hundred years later than the burial. So what we want to do is some excavations throughout the village to try and see if we can find any pottery that dates broadly the same date as the burial up on the hillside. So have we got any sort of 7th century Middle Anglo-Saxon date pottery?
With the army of volunteers briefed, it's time to get digging. And we're starting our test pits close to the church. The bones of the Winfarthing lady are held at Norwich Castle Museum and are too fragile to travel to site. They've never been properly analysed, so Jackie and Naomi are going to see what they can discover from her remains and from the soil samples that were collected at the time.
Oh, that's from within the bowl.
Ah, right, okay.
So we might need to do some flotation for both environmental and bone
Artifact retrieval,
collection,
yeah. Because literally every fragment counts, especially in this case.
If enough survives, we might be able to tell how old our woman was and what sort of life she led. And although the bones have been clearly badly damaged, Jack is confident that we'll still be able to glean some useful information from them.
There's an edge there, isn't
There's
there?
a straight edge there, isn't there?
Back on site, Matt and Joe are beginning to think that they might be in the right place.
So was that the natural that the grave was cut
that it
into,
was cut
right?
into, and so the cut is much cleaner and browner.
Yeah.
So
I
it
think
looks
we
very
need to
like that,
take-
the grave cut, but I'm not sure what the edge of the trench would look like, and I can't see.
I think it might be good to take just a bit more off this
end,
side,
yeah.
but carefully, because we are higher here than we are on that bit.
I mean, we've got our level here, though, haven't we, Joe?
But we've
I'd say?
definitely, we've definitely got the level.
Yeah.
You keep going, and we'll either find out we're in the right place or wrong place.
Where are we going to put this spoil, Joe? Shall I swing it round and chuck it behind me over there?
One of the mysteries we hope to solve is why Our Lady was buried here, because there's no known Anglo-Saxon centre of importance nearby, which begs the question, where did she come from? One possibility is that she came from Francia, a hugely powerful kingdom which expanded across modern-day Europe during what is known as the Migration period after the fall of the Roman Empire. And some of the finds support this theory.
This is the plan of the grave. Let me start with the bronze bowl, because that was the thing that allowed us to discover the grave. You can see that it's big, it's green, this is it in the ground, and this very corroded base just survives this corrosion, really. It's only the rim that really survives.
And so this would be, it's quite a substantial...
It's quite big.
Yes.
It's not huge, and but it's not really like any other bronze bowl that we know of, or brass bowl.
Yes.
It's quite important what it's made of, so we really need to get it XRF to find out exactly what it's made of. That was the bowl here. Next to it is the pot. And the pot, we know, is a Frankish import. It's not like a handmade Anglo-Saxon migration period pot. It is wheel-made, it's entirely different, and having this quite wide mouth means that it may have been used for drinking.
Francia was a very large, successful early medieval kingdom that, unlike Britain, never lost some of those Roman techniques like wheel-turned pottery, mass-producing wheel-turned pottery. So we can instantly see that this is wheel-turned. It couldn't, therefore, possibly have been made in Britain. It's an import. And although that sort of pot's fairly common in the Frankish world, it's extremely rare in Britain.
Wow. So was this part of migration or trade, do you think?
Well, it could, of course, have been either. So I think the fact that these pots are actually quite rare in England suggests to me it's not the sort of thing you could just buy and sell. So we know in this period from written sources that leading families in Anglo-Saxon England were sending their sons and daughters to be educated in monasteries in Francia, in the Frankish world. So could this woman, for example, have spent some of her earlier life in Francia, in a monastery there, and have brought back with her objects, ideas, ways of doing things, all sorts of things, including this pot?
But I can show you something that is absolutely Anglo-Saxon. It's this pendant. Incredible. There.
Gorgeous.
Which is looking slightly different to the way that you see it with the naked eye, if you like, because the scanning process is actually seen through these transparent garnets and has allowed us to see much more of the construction than we would normally. This is just the most phenomenal object. If you have a look round it, you can see these rings of animal ornament actually kind of made in garnet cellwork or cloisonne. Here you can see an animal head made out of garnet set in gold. This little tiny eye is just about 0.5 millimetre across. And with the curving body and ending up in something that looks like another head at the other end. So we've got a ring of those, and then we've got an inner ring of more of them. And between the two, if I can raise it up a bit, you can see that we've got a raised ring of three-dimensional garnets in between, which is something that I have just never seen on something like this. It's absolutely phenomenal.
What was it actually like seeing this come up out of the ground?
So first of all, we were absolutely flummoxed by the quality and the size and the fact that it was a pendant. But it was when Stephen picked it up and turned it over, that was really the heart-stopping moment. I know.
That is exquisite in itself.
And what's really interesting is that when you get something like this on a big screen, you always see something new. And Helena and I were just spotting that the loop, which is also inlaid with garnets, these flat garnets here, it's actually a human face, a bearded man.
Because I know these people, they probably weren't formerly Christians, but are these, I can see all sorts of crosses.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. It does have crosses on it. What that means in terms of Christianity and her personal views, well, what do you think, Helena?
People have been arguing about that for a very long time, but I do think that combining the cruciform designs with all these other much more obviously pre-Christian sort of ideas and images like the intertwined snakes and so on, I think that was quite deliberate. I think they are trying to integrate the two things to bring them together in really interesting and novel ways. So I don't think it is a coincidence or it's just a fashion or just a design. I think it was deliberate. That ambiguity was deliberate.
Yes. So Sutton Hoo, there are some similar sorts of things that were excavated from that site. I mean, how does this compare?
The Sutton Hoo jewellery, a lot of the time, it's so perfect that it's almost inhuman.
Yes.
It doesn't look like it's been touched by a human hand. Whereas this has got a lot of humanity in it because it's got subtle flaws maybe or things that we can see. You can see here the lines of where each individual panel has been soldered. And you see these bits here that look like almost solid gold. They look as if the garnets have been set into solid gold. Well, on the Sutton Hoo jewellery, they're made by, each cell is hollow and the solid ones are made by soldering a lid on top. They're known as lidded cells. Here they've been made by taking gold strips and popping them into the cell and kind of smoothing them down, and you can just see hints of that. And what I find so amazing about this is that there's so much soldering involved. You've got a gold framework and you've got to solder extra gold on using gold solder. You've got to melt the solder, you mustn't melt the rest of the gold, and they're doing all this without an electric soldering iron and without even a thermometer.
The garnets from this beautiful pendant might have come from as far away as Asia. They are so fine that it's even been suggested that the Windfarthing woman may have been of royal descent. And Joe thinks that a burial of this status might be marked by a mound or a ring pitch.
This needs a bit of a clean-up, but we don't really want to go any deeper because we do want to be able to see those ephemeral features, particularly, you know, we might get a ring ditch, and if we do, we know they're only going to be, they won't be as deep as the grave, only going to be sort of 10, 15 centimetres.
Back in Norwich Castle Museum, Jack is confirmed from the width of the pelvis that the burial is indeed female.
And then we come to the chin.
Ah.
Lovely little feminine square chin at
Dinky
the front.
chin.
Tiny square chin. A male chin would be much broader, but this is quite rounded, but it has got that little squared bit.
It's dainty.
Well, they're rather like yours, actually. Look at that at the front, a little squared area there. But generally speaking, looking at this skeleton, you can see it really is quite small and gracile. So it's quite a petite individual, possibly not quite as petite as you, but nonetheless quite a petite individual. So the next question is going to be how old she was. Well, looking up here, I know she's got fusion of her sutures. Those are where the bits of the skull come together, the cranium comes together.
Yep.
You've got those interdigitations that come together.
Yeah,
and they are
woven.
completely fused. It doesn't show up terribly well there, but you can see that little interdigitations along there, and you can see them quite well on the inside. So that's the coronal suture, the bit that goes across the front here, and that's the sagittal suture, the one that goes down the middle. And they are very well fused. So she's not a spring chicken. But then looking at the teeth are always very useful. And what we can see here is you've got very worn occlusal surfaces, those biting surfaces of the teeth, where the teeth come together, you can see they're almost worn flat. and also you have got exposure of the dentine. So with those things there and also some changes I can see in the spine, I would say this woman is certainly over 40 years of age,
Right.
potentially over 50. The other thing, again going back to the teeth, there is not a lot of dental calculus on here.
Okay.
Now that suggests that she obviously had quite a good diet as a child. She was looked after as a child. She's managed to live into a fairly good old age for the time. And looking at her teeth, it doesn't look like she had a poor diet as she got older either.
We're sending some of her teeth for isotope analysis, which could tell us whether the Windfarthing woman lived some of her life in Francia, or whether she was born and bred more locally. And if so, did she live in the village of Windfarthing, where our test pits are well and truly up and running? Well, who better to help us answer this question than Anglo-Saxon pottery expert Paul Blinkhorn?
Forgot my glasses, but congratulations, you have a piece of medieval pottery.
Oh, fantastic.
That was made sometime probably in the 12th or 13th century or thereabouts.
Right.
Okay, it's not the biggest piece of pottery you're ever going to see, but that's definitely medieval. And it's probably locally made. There was loads of little kilns around the villages about then, but that's definitely medieval.
Fantastic. Right, so that is our earliest bit so far, and only about 700 years later, Narberry.
So we're definitely heading in the right direction in Windfarthing. And back on site, we're working slowly and carefully in Trench 1, but there's no sign of Our Lady's grave. We're about to open up a second trench, where Tom thought he might have found another burial. Over the years, he's found a range of Anglo-Saxon finds in this part of the field, including some more gold pendants. It's possible Our Lady was buried in or near a high-status cemetery.
Yeah, there's some bone in here.
Okay. I think we got it.
And it looks like we're in the right place.
Oh, you've got, here, this is it then, isn't it?
Oh, there we go.
It looks as if they're in situ, doesn't it, from the relationship between
Yeah,
the two?
I think, because what that is, that looks like, that's femur. That's the whole of the femur there.
Right. But if it's aligned how we would expect it to be, then it should be with the head at this end to the northwest. Well, that is what I'd expect.
It looks to be, because you see how they're diverging that way. Well, that's how it works. You go from your knees and it diverges out to your hips. So I think it looks like that's going to be the hip area there.
The other thing that would be interesting to try and work out is whether we can see the top end of the cut, the skull end of the cut at this end, wouldn't it? At this height.
Yeah, I mean you can see how these are all old brakes, right? So you're going to have had the plough damage, but also it's not just the plough hitting it; it's the pressure of the machinery moving over the top, which breaks it up.
We now know for sure that Our Lady's grave is not the only one in this field. And if there are any grave goods, we might be able to confirm we're looking at a second Anglo-Saxon burial, or even a cemetery. So did this site hold some special significance in the 7th century? Sam Newton is an authority on pre-Viking East Anglia and has been poring over the records in search of answers.
Well, the biggest clue to the landscape is the place name, Winners Fjorthing, which gives us Windfarthing. Right. Winners Quarter Place. The fourth part is clearly a fourth part of a much broader territory. Right. And when we look at the map, what we see is how the landscape used to be organised into these blocks called hundreds. It basically is an area for administrative purposes corresponding to 100 households, 100 farms, if you like. And they're always distinguished by impressive boundary markers and, above all, the central meeting place. When we look at ours, we seem to be in what's now called Dis 100, but we know from earlier documents that the original name of the 100 was Windfarthing. So the whole 100 was a fourth part of a larger unit, which means that this place was the centre of authority for this whole landscape. The next question that arises from that, where are the other 3 quarters?
So where are the other 3 quarters?
Well, we've got the magic of the map here to show us, and you can see that This corresponds to a larger block subdivided into 4: Winfarthing, Earsham, Hartismere and the Bishops or Hoxton Hundred.
So the Winfarthing we know, which is just a village up there and a relatively small medieval parish, in the period that the lady was living around here and being buried here, was a much larger entity.
Exactly.
She would have known a different Winfarthing to what we know, presumably.
Yeah, well, the whole of the landscape would have been called Winfarthing. It is at Winfarthing that the meeting place was held, which gives its name to the broader hundred.
Although we only have solid evidence of these hundreds a few centuries later, if Sam's right, Winfarthing could have been the centre of influence for this whole area and could help us understand why Our Lady was buried here in the 7th century. So Stuart heads to the south and Derek and Lawrence head to the north, to the village of Winfarthing, to look for evidence of Anglo-Saxon activity to support the theory. As getting towards the end of day 1, it's proving difficult to work out what's what in Trench 2.
When we dig it, if we dig it really carefully, we might find some teeth.
Where Joe and Tilda have been searching for the head end of the burial.
Okay. So you think the top end?
I think the end is somewhere about here. It needs a bit of a clean up.
Right. Well, in that case, it's going to have gone, because if you think where if we've got the hip area here.
Yep.
Right. The hip area is sort of just below middle. So a head would come up to here.
Yeah.
So if all we've got is that, then we're going to have lost an awful lot.
These graves are being gradually removed by the plough. So this might be the last opportunity to see what they can tell us about what might have been an important part of East Anglia in the Anglo-Saxon period. We've just had our first Anglo-Saxon find come out of one of the test pits near the church in Winfarthing.
Yeah, fantastic. So this is Thetford Ware, I think I heard on the grapevine.
Brilliant.
That's been beautiful, two rim shirts there. You can see that sort of edge there. It's nice they've been washed as well. And you can see they're not the same vessel because they're kind of slightly different shapes. We've got at least a couple. I mean, the Thetford Ware is about 850 to 1100 AD, so that's from kind of King Alfred, just after the Norman Conquest.
Fantastic.
That's just that first clue that we've got a pre-Norman Conquest settlement, which is, I mean, this pottery is 200 or 300 years earlier than the church, the current church building, suggests there was something here there. And at the moment, you're our best bet for, you know, the possibility of, if there was a settlement here that's contemporary with our burial up on the hillside, that it might have been this area near the church.
That's brilliant.
Great news, and that's not all, because Derek and Lawrence's eagle eyes have already spotted some masonry in the wall that looks a lot earlier than the medieval church.
Lawrence and I popped back to site and we picked up Adam's drone, and he's now behind me doing a little bit of photogrammetry on the stone in the side of the church, and what that'll give us is a really high density 3D model that we can run some analysis on and highlight any microtopographic features. So it should highlight any carvings or engravings and help us figure out if it is an interesting stone or not.
If the stone is from an earlier structure, it might be more evidence of the village's Anglo-Saxon origins. Back on site, there's still no evidence of the grave of our Winfarthing woman. But we're feeling more positive in Trench 2, where Jackie's been soaking the ground to soften the soil and bring out the colours of any features or burials.
I think there's something going on here.
I think there's another feature here. Can you see
Yes,
the charcoal?
I think there is something going on in there.
Some bone in that area there.
It's been a tough day, finding not a great deal, but just as the light is beginning to fade, one of the metal detectorists has discovered something in the spoil heap of Trench 2.
Can I borrow your trowel?
Yeah, sure. Rather special, isn't it? Wow.
Gosh.
Oh, isn't that nice?
What are we looking at?
Oh my goodness. Right, okay. We're looking
Oh gosh, we're looking at, I want to burst into tears.
No.
We're looking at a 7th century buckle, and it's got a slight curve to it, and if you turn it on the side view, and if you turn it over, it's actually clearer here. You can see the loop and you can see the pin. And it's got a triangular plate that ends in a big lump there, and there's something going on here. I really hope I'm right, but I'm not going to know until I've cleaned it up.
Right.
And at its best, what might it be?
At its best, given that we are in an Anglo-Saxon cemetery, it would definitely be a buckle on a strap, a thin strap that is probably at the waist and that's curved to fit around the body and is early 7th century. But as I say, I can't tell until it's clean.
And I sense you're a little bit emotional about this. Why?
Well, I hadn't realised quite how much pressure there is put on somebody who calls Time Team in to one of their sites, and then there's not much found on day one. It just has made me realise how relieved I am when I see something that has come from the people who were on this site with my woman.
It's a huge relief to have found a precious item that might even have come from the grave in Trench 2.
You can see we've only got the very, very bottom of the grave. It's obviously really badly plough damaged, but we can be confident that that is a grave.
Yes, absolutely. And those are legs going, are the feet over there, or?
Yes, we think it's someone with the head. It's a roughly sort of northwest, southeast aligned, and we think the head is we don't think it's here now. The head was probably.
Yes, you've just got the very, very
at
base
this
of the
end. But as you can see, it's really badly damaged, and we've only got just this tiniest bit of the grave surviving, and that in itself is really frustrating because there's nothing else in this trench.
Apart from plough scars.
Apart from plough scars. But of course, this is so badly damaged and so shallow, we don't know whether this is an isolated burial or this is the only one that survives. But at least we do now have absolute concrete proof that she was not alone.
This is a fantastic end to day one. It feels like we're just beginning to reveal the story of Our Lady of Winfarthing. Although we now know she was not buried alone, we still need to find out how many others were buried alongside her. Was this an important Anglo-Saxon cemetery? In which case, why was it placed here? 2 more days left to find out.
If you want us to investigate more sites, you can make it happen. So, help us reach 10,000 members on Patreon.
It's day 2 at Winfarthing in Norfolk, where Helen has brought the team together to investigate the site of a grave of a 7th century Anglo-Saxon woman. It was discovered by Tom Lucking in 2015, buried with some stunning finds.
This is the massive gold pendant. I know, it's absolutely extraordinary.
Exquisite. Jackie's analysis of the bones tells us that she lived a long and healthy life, and even gives us a glimpse into what she may have looked like.
Lovely little feminine square chin at the front, tiny square chin, very like yours actually.
Our excavations have uncovered at least one other grave, so we could be looking at an Anglo-Saxon cemetery.
A head would come up to here. Yeah. So if all we've got is that, then we're going to have lost an awful lot.
It seems the site of this important burial is gradually being ploughed away, so every new find is incredibly important.
Oh gosh, we're looking at, I want to burst into tears.
It's the beginning of the day, and in Trench 1, Matt and Tom are opening up a bigger area in search of traces of the grave of our Winfarthing woman.
Right, this is it. Fingers crossed. All of them.
But there's still no sign of the 2015 excavation, the grave, or a ring ditch.
Nope.
No.
Definitely not there.
It's interesting that she's not there's actually not much. I mean, we know we're in the right ballpark, but there's obviously not much else going on around her.
Further down the slope in Trench 2, the overnight watering is helping Jackie and Hilda make out the grave cut of the burial they found yesterday.
You can really see the colours as well, and the edges, or what remains of the edges, a lot better now.
We're right at the bottom of the grave, so it looks really narrow because we're right at the bottom and it's so shallow, but it has made it stand out. And I think obviously the skull's going to have gone, but all we can do is investigate and see what's surviving there and what we can tell from it. Delicate operation.
And there's no point leaving it in situ because it'll just get destroyed in the end.
So shallow. I mean, it's right on the interface between the plough soil and the natural. I mean, this would be gone in another couple of years completely with the ploughing of it. So
Helen, John, I see you've got a digger ready. So what's the plan for today?
Well, the plan for today is to treat this field like any other field and just have the question, what is in this field, and apply a standard technique.
I mean, up until now, we've been led by work that's been done in the past. So what we want to do is investigate our geophysics now. We've got this clear ditch, which we think is sort of shown on the early maps, isn't it? And at this point here, there might just be the hints of a square feature. So we thought a trench that takes in that response and goes over the ditch as well. If it is a square feature, it would be very interesting from a Saxon cemetery point of view.
Certainly.
But it is a long shot.
Right, so we should have 2 intercutting ditches here.
So Matt moves his attention to Trench 3 to see whether the square feature in the geophys or the ditch have anything to do with the Anglo-Saxon cemetery.
Okay. Yeah, lovely.
Stuart's been scouring the landscape for an Anglo-Saxon open-air parliament, which confusingly is called a thing or a ting in Old English. Sam Newton believes that this ting could be the key to our story. Stuart's begun his survey in the village of Shelfanger and has spotted a significant field name on the maps.
This little strip of field alongside this hedge line, this parish boundary, is called Pilgrim Meadow, which is a very, very interesting name. Is that a legacy of some memory of people visiting this place for burial? Long lost in folklore, but to retain a name like that in this landscape, where most of the field names are just descriptions of the sizes of fields, like 4-acre or 6-acre field, actually raises the possibility that this has been a historic routeway of some form or another in an early landscape.
And as he walks down to the stream, he's getting a very different perspective on the landscape.
I'm almost totally enclosed. I'm in a hollow in the landscape. I can't see out to the east, I can't see out to the west. To the north, the landscape rises again. So I'm at the feeling I'm within sort of a large bowl in the landscape.
He's following the course of the river along the streamline past our site.
What's interesting when you get down to the stream and looking up towards the head of the valley is how it does look as if you're heading into almost like an alcove in the landscape, and the further you walk into that alcove, the narrower this valley actually becomes. And the further I walk, in reality, the higher the burial appears up on the slope up to my right.
He's making his way to Wyn Farthing itself, where they've got a good number of test pits underway to look for Anglo-Saxon activity near the church.
So you didn't lay the charcoal, would you? So that's the only bit that seems a bit odd.
Oh, what have we got here? Looks like pottery, doesn't it?
And as the archaeology and the finds get more interesting, there's a competitive edge emerging.
I think we're all listening out to see what anybody else finds.
Is there a bit of competition between test
Is there
pits
competition? Are we
I felt a little bit
competitive?
of competition when I found out that their hole was deeper than ours. Yeah.
Yes. It makes you sort of like swing that mattock a bit. A bit harder.
So we're the pit so far which has the most interesting find.
Oh.
So
what is the most interesting find?
We're very excited at that. It's we think late Anglo-Saxon fragments.
And one of our volunteers has experience of Anglo-Saxon finds. In fact, he dug with Basil Brown, the man who found the graves at Sutton Hoo.
I knew Basil for about 25 years. A very genteel man, full of knowledge. Yeah, he said what you must do is keep your edges straight on a section. So this is what I do.
Back on site in Trench 3, Matt thinks the square feature on the geophys was just geology, but the ditch is looking more promising.
Well, I would say, Lindsay, we've got the ditch here, haven't
Yeah,
we?
nice clear ditch coming through.
Yeah. So should we clear of the edges? Kind of along there. That side looks a bit straighter, doesn't it? But
It's
got
pretty
some
good.
chalky stuff. Ow, flipping heck, it's rock solid. So
Do you need
hard
a
around it.
mattock?
If we want to get into, if it is medieval and there's medieval stuff in it, it's going to be,
Right at the base.
I guess, yeah, right at the base and where it's silted up,
Yep.
and then this upper stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of, fairly recent.
As part of our investigations, we're creating a virtual museum. In it, we're collecting finds that help to tell the story of the Windfarthing woman. And I'm curious to find out what the purpose was for the chatelaine rings that ran from her waist to her knee.
That's them in close-up, and they weren't linked together, they were all separate, and they're decorated on both faces with these stamped circles, which is quite a common stamp shape.
And are they purely decorative, or do they have any purpose?
Well, I'm always reluctant to say anything is purely decorative. They may well have had some kind of symbolic meaning. The fact that they sometimes have keys or kind of symbolic keys attached to them, so they may be meant to reflect something about the special role of the woman in the household. But who can say?
And they can have practical things. I mean, our woman has got a knife at her waist, but sometimes there's a knife on the end of this, and so you can imagine that's quite handy. You hold your knife's on a chain kind of thing. You can never lose it. Carrying on with the symbolism theme, moving up to her neck, she's got, in addition to the great big pendant, she's got this little short choker necklace as well. And two of the pendants are made out of Frankish coins.
Oh. So who's depicted on the coin?
Well, the coin is struck by Sigebert III. So, Helena, is this the royal head of Sigebert III?
Well, we assume that this is meant to evoke the king of the Franks, but of course it looks terribly Roman in a way, doesn't it? He's wearing a diadem, he's got something around his neck, so I think he's meant to look quite Roman, but I think we are meant to understand that he is in fact the king of the Franks and the person under whom this coin was struck.
And it's been converted into a pendant by the addition of this loop held on by a gold rivet.
And what's on the reverse side?
Let's turn it over. This is really interesting, isn't it, Helena? Because it's got a cross. Now, I think if we had just come across that cold, we might have wondered if the cross was shown to indicate one thing or the head was shown. It's on both sides. As excavated, it was the head facing out, not the cross.
Yeah.
The last thing in the middle of this little choker necklace is this rather marvellous gold pendant. And I think something that you'll like, Helena, on the back, if I can turn it over and move it around a bit so you can really see there's a repair patch just there.
Yeah, you can see that very clearly.
Yeah.
Well, that is really interesting because in quite a lot of these rich 7th century female graves, you have got very posh jewellery that's been broken. Sometimes it's been repaired, sometimes it's not been repaired, but it was clearly relatively old and well loved and well worn at the point at which it was buried. And you wonder whether actually the importance of these objects was actually enhanced by the fact that it was old and had been around for a while, maybe passed through several generations. Who knows?
The finds were clearly well used, precious, and suggest an international influence as well as pagan and Christian iconography. Derek and Lawrence are going to see what else the grave goods can tell us using X-ray fluorescence, because their chemical makeup should reveal information that is invisible to the naked eye. It's possible that the striking similarities of Our Lady's pendant with jewellery from Sutton Hoo could indicate Winfarthing benefited from royal patronage. The quality of the gold might help to confirm this theory. And whether the bowl was made of bronze or brass could tell us if it was made in the Byzantine world or in East Anglia. The bottom of the bowl fell apart on excavation, but fragments were preserved along with the soil from inside it. So Naomi has been sifting through the contents to see what she could find.
So right now it's a little bit confusing, a bit intriguing.
And in amongst the green metal of the bowl itself, she found some organic material.
So yeah, I'm not sure what this woody material is. It's a bit confusing. It could have been sort of a lining, or even the bowl could have been sat inside this wooden thing. Really not sure. I've never seen anything like this. So yeah, more and more intrigue. But this is why a lot of stuff happens in post-excavation. That's when you get your answers.
It's painstaking work, but knowing the contents of this unusual bowl could unlock so much about our Winfarthing woman. Back in the trenches, we're confident that there's more than one burial in Trench 2.
So I've got the burial in the middle, but you've just found this other possible feature running in the same alignment.
Yeah, the top of the grave cut seems to be aligned with the top of that one there. I started cleaning this back to about here, and then I noticed that there was a sort of shadow, and I thought it was the sun, but then the sun's gone in now, and yeah, it's definitely really well defined. And yeah, I'm just going to clean it back a bit more and see where we go.
It definitely looks a bit suspicious, doesn't it?
It's very suspicious, yeah, definitely.
On the other side of the trench, Jackie's been working away on another burial.
I've got more than one bone now, because I've got one down here, but I've also got another couple up here. And although it's in awful condition, but it does suggest that it might be articulated. But it's right on the surface. I can't see a cut, a feature that it relates to at all. It's right on that subsoil. But interestingly, it's not the same alignment of that grave that we found there, or where you are over there.
Mm. But still, possibly 3 graves.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it is now starting to look more like a cemetery than just singletons, just one-off burials.
In Trench 3, attempts to get down into the ditch that Matt found earlier are being hampered by the solid ground. But a sudden rainstorm has come to our aid.
Here they come. How many people can you get under one camping tent? There are 3 absolute pros over there still digging away in the rain.
Changing the colour in the trousers from one side to the other side.
Taking refuge in the dome, Helen's begun the lengthy process of cleaning the buckle that was found yesterday in Trench 2.
And would this have been for a belt or for...
It's some kind of strap, but they're normally found at the waist, so it's thought of as a belt fitting. But because these are found almost always with men, there is sometimes a hint that it may have been some kind of sword belt. And what I'm hoping is that there's going to be some kind of decoration underneath here. And these can range from appliqued separate components, you know, like sometimes there's one amazing one where there's a little model of a fish, to just stamp decoration or all sorts of things. What we're seeing here is the tops of 2 rivets. This one looks like it's got a decorative boss covering it. Mm-hmm. This one looks like it's lost that boss. You can almost see the shaft of the rivet. And then there's a third one on the bottom here. We've actually got to the point where I'd quite like to see this under a microscope rather than just doing it with the naked eye. So bring it into focus. It's wonderful to watch it. There, lovely. Now, if I point with my little thorn, can you see there's a straight edge along there?
Yes.
And that is the hinge that's joining this cast frame to this sheet plate.
Is that the hinge?
On focus. Well, this is the end of the end of the underplate. So you've got to imagine the strap coming up under between where I'm poking.
Yeah.
So if there was any strap surviving, this is where it would be coming. This is where it would be. Now, what we don't understand is what's between these two sandwiches. These two pieces of bread, so to speak. What is the filling in that sandwich? Why have we got two layers? That's not normal.
At this point, I left Helen to go visit the test pits, leaving the cameras to keep recording.
We're just getting one of those odd time team effects now, where you carry on doing something when you'd normally stop because somebody's filming you and they just need a few more minutes of film. And I had thought I'd got as far as I could with this, and I'm just gently brushing, and tiny, tiny bits of soil are coming off, imperceptibly virtually, and they're revealing more detail. And I think I've got something I completely hadn't spotted before, which is a possible repair. And a lot more decoration is coming out. But it's just about visible there.
After the dig, X-ray revealed more detail of what appears to be a highly decorated buckle. It tells us at least one man was buried in a richly furnished grave a few decades before Our Lady. It's one for the virtual museum, as it shows that she wasn't just popped into a cemetery of ordinary people. And now the rainstorm has brought out the colours in Trench 2. Francis and Romy think that they can see more possible graves.
There's a bit of bone coming through here,
Yeah.
just the leg.
I've got a
the
tiny
grave there.
fragment. I think I might have a strip of orange that's not quite orange, which that bit of bone lies on top of.
And that's what I think I have here. It's similar. It's very brown rather than this being orange. I think
we might have two more graves.
I think we do have 2 more graves.
Yeah, definitely.
So how many?
I think I've got one here as well, by the way.
So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
6 graves in total. One is not on the same alignment. But yeah, 6 graves. I'd call that a cemetery.
Me too.
Any grave goods from this cemetery have probably been spread across the field by the plough, which tallies with the location of the finds that Tom has discovered over the years.
And then you've got these nail cleaners, which are classic Romano-British gear for keeping clean.
He also found a lot of Roman coins and artefacts in the field to the north of the burials, which he thought might be the remains of a villa. So we're wondering what connection it might have to our Anglo-Saxon story.
Oh yes, these are bigger bits. That's definitely. Or is that a field drain? Is that tegular or field drain? I think that's Imbrex.
But although there's evidence of a building, there doesn't seem to be enough to suggest it's a villa.
I'm not convinced. I'm really not convinced there's anything there, you know.
Me neither. There just isn't enough, is there?
I mean, I've field war Roman sites that's using masses of stuff, you know what it's like.
Yeah, you'd be tripping over it, wouldn't you?
Absolutely,
The Romans really did like their stuff.
Yes.
So.
And this is all local as well. It's very small scale.
But the one thing we do need to think about is the huge number of coins that have been found in this field. Like, I think it's about 100, 120.
That is a lot.
They are focused on the springs over there.
I mean, it might be worth investigating around the spring. Has it been geophysed around the spring, you know?
Don't know yet. I think we really do need a geophys plot to help us, just to have a look.
So Geophys set to work to see if there's any evidence of buildings around the spring. Interestingly, Stuart's investigations have led him up the stream to exactly the same field.
This gap in the hedge saved me a long walk round. In fact, we're just on the slope above the stream, coming from the field with a burial in it. Come through this hedge and try not to leave too much of myself behind. And out we come into the field where all the Roman building material has been found. Kind of a bit of a journey along the stream really, from Shelfhanger right up to the north head of the valley. The further north I've come, the narrower it gets, the more enclosed it gets. That's been a bit of a trip. I'm ready for a bit of a sit down and a rest under a tree. Bit of thinking time now.
A Roman spring and a shrine might explain why this site would have been a suitable burial ground for Anglo-Saxon aristocracy. But do Tom's Roman finds support this theory?
Where does it start?
Well, it starts with this late Iron Age material here, on the cusp of the Roman period. We've got a Nauheim derivative brooch, or a fragment of one here.
Oh, that's one of those one-piece ones.
Yeah, with the coils at the
simple.
top, all made in one piece.
Almost like a safety pin.
Yeah. And even a little Iron Age coin here. I think it's a copy, and then it would have been the core of a gold coin. And then moving on into the 1st, 2nd century, we've got lots of objects of personal adornment, like bits of brooches, some of these lovely classic Romano-British nail cleaners. Which
hoiking out the dirt.
Form part of those little cosmetic sets with tweezers and those ear scoops. And we've got this really exciting assemblage of late 2nd, early 3rd century material. And it's really exciting because it gives us some insight into the identities of the people living or coming to the site at that time. There's part of a little military bout plate here that would have formed part of a sword belt of a soldier.
Right.
And then also we've got several bits of harness fittings. We've got a pendant here and some studs. And in the mid-Roman period, it would only really be soldiers who'd have access to horses. They'd be quite an expensive accoutrement.
So that's the Roman army, but what are they doing here? Because this is just the middle of nowhere in the Roman period, isn't it?
But you have to think of the Roman army as being mobilised throughout the landscape. And we've got probably soldiers coming here, keeping check on the local population. And moving on to the coins, we've got this massive explosion of coins from the late 3rd century all the way through to the end of the Roman period. Now, you kind of have to expect that on any Romano-British site of the late Roman period. But what's really interesting is the number of coins that we've got in this late 3rd century period, 275 to 285. That's a little bit unusual. Usually, if you have that number of coins, it would be an urban profile, and we definitely don't have a city out there.
And can you shed any light on this, Rachel?
Well, we do have these two things here.
Okay.
Which are coin blanks. And we know that during this period, there is a lot of coin copying going on in Roman Britain.
Yes, to create more loose change? Yeah.
It's possible somebody is minting counterfeit coinage on the site, perhaps for deposition in a votive deposit, maybe, who knows. There's also a possibility that there's a small hoard or purse drop concealed amongst these coins, because we've got quite a lot of coins of the Emperor Carausius. There are 5 or 6 issues, and they're all quite well preserved, so they've not been knocking around as much in the plough soil, perhaps.
So what's happening in the 4th century?
Well, there are certainly more coins, not quite as many as there are in the late 3rd century, but you can see they run all the way through to 402. Mm-hmm. We've also got some fragments of bracelets and this really nice finger ring, which is made of tin. It looks like it's made of silver, but it's actually tin, as we found out from XRF. They tend to be dedicated to the gods, so that might give some support to the idea of votive deposition on the site.
So, now you've looked at all of it, Philippa, what's your thought about what it all means?
So what I've really noticed is that these are the sorts of things that you do tend to get offered in votive deposits. So these are things with personal meaning to people, and they offer them to gods as part of their personal relationship with the gods.
And do you think that's matched with the pottery and the building material, Rachel?
Well, not quite as elaborate. The pottery is much more domestic in nature. We've got the coarse grey wares that will be for food storage, food preparation, cooking, eating. A couple of colour-coded pieces are probably drinking vessels or flagons to hold the liquids.
But my eye is completely caught by these, because that to me looks like it's the keying for plaster that's put on a box flue tile, implying central heating up the walls.
Indeed, we even have a corner fragment of one of the box flue tile blocks, again with the combed keying for the plaster.
So we've got a centrally heated building?
We have a ceramic roof as well, Tegular and Imbrex roof tiles, and 2 sorts of Roman brick.
So we've got a building, a centrally heated building, with a tile roof, maybe a tile floor, and in the same field, we've got a votive site that's attracting offerings.
Yes, that sounds like it could be the case, yeah.
So it's an intriguing theory which could help explain why this site was chosen for our Windfarthing woman's final resting place. John, meanwhile, has had a revelation about where her grave might actually be.
Everybody has said the
Yes.
burial was south of the ditch.
Because that was what was on the plot from the original geophysics.
But
it didn't match the grid reference.
No, and your grid reference that you've given us
Matches
is
that.
exactly there,
Right.
north of the ditch. So the point is, when the trench was being dug, nobody would know it was south of the ditch because you didn't know where the ditch was in the field.
No, that is entirely a good point. Yeah, we had absolutely no idea.
No idea where that was. Now we've got a GPS point that coincides with the plan. We've got to look at it.
That does sound very tempting.
Okay then, John, this is it. For the fourth time.
No pressure.
No pressure.
So Mad extends Trench 3 to test John's theory, but also on the lookout for other burials or a ring ditch.
I mean, it's definitely, that's clean, isn't it, there? Clean, natural.
Well, there's nothing obvious.
No.
But how can you lose a burial?
He did say it wasn't going to be easy. Back in the church in Windfarthing, Paul Blinkhorn has been sifting through the finds that have been coming in from the test pits.
Hi Paul, how's it going?
It's getting interesting. We're down to about context 4 now, and we're starting to get some really interesting stuff. I don't know if you saw these yesterday, but a couple of nice bits of late Saxon pottery. The rims from Thetford were jars. You'll be unsurprised now it's made in Thetford, probably in about the 10th or 11th century. I mean, quite often in this part of the world, the villages come into being around about the 10th century, and so that's kind of a good marker for early part of the village. It was in the topsoil, but nevertheless, it's with the thumb sort of thing.
So that's good.
Yeah.
What else have we got?
We're starting to get lots of nice bits of medieval now as well. Another bit of late Saxon from another one of the pits, another bit of Thetford ware.
Excellent. So we've got 2 different test pits producing late Saxon ware.
Yeah. We're getting bits of early medieval now.
Nice.
There's 2 little bits of the standard early medieval, 11th, 12th century. And my favourite find so far, it's a 13th, 14th century jug rim. And you can see where the potter's made a lip with his finger or her finger, yeah.
I love that. It's brilliant when you get that with pottery, isn't it?
Yeah, it brings it to life. That was probably made at Eddingham down in Essex. You find it all over East Anglia from about the late 12th century onwards. It's looking very much, even in these early days, like we're looking at a late Saxon post-Viking village. I mean, there was a complete reorganisation of the landscape after the Vikings went through. And a lot of new settlements sprung up. And if you imagine Wild West cavalry forts with a village around them and a church, that was the kind of thing. And it's starting to look like Windfarthing was possibly one of those, but it's very early. I'm not doing that with 3 shirts of pottery. Even I won't do that with 3 shirts of pottery.
The hope is that these test pits mark the start of a longer-term project in Windfarthing.
And have you taken to it? Is it something you'd
It's
like?
exciting, yes. I mean, as I was saying to Danny, when I weed my garden next time, it'll just take hours because I should be sifting through everything to see what's in there.
And the sense of community that I've
Well,
really...
this is my new best friend. We met this morning, but when you're pot washing together...
My dad had to turn the hose on, which was
Yes,
a
that
start
was
on it,
true
and it's what
too.
covered everyone in it. But no, it's it is. It is, as I say, local people, and you just strike up conversations.
But when Time Team leave, do you think
Oh, yes.
archaeology and this sense of community, will that be something that'll be left behind?
I think so, yeah.
Yesterday, Derek and Lawrence spotted some masonry in the medieval church wall, which they thought could have come from something earlier.
Thanks to Adam's photogrammetry, we've been doing some 3D modelling of it, and we've been trying to pull out some of the details. But there are features on there. There are engravings on here.
Doesn't it look like part of a cross
It
shaft.
does, exactly like that.
It's nice to hear you guys saying that, because this is what we thought. And Derek, I must say, Derek spotted this, and he's done amazingly well here. Something like
Undoubtedly, I mean, that's certainly man-made, but very, very weathered, of course, which is what you would expect of a much older Anglo-Saxon standing cross, very characteristic of the 7th and 8th centuries, and which, of course, over time would weather and the wind and various vicissitudes, the Danes marauding the countryside, they tend to fall over. And so when it comes to building a church, the medieval masons would be recycling any rubble stone that comes to hand, especially if it's nearby.
But other than that, as I say, we got a bit distracted by this. So I can't add too much more landscape story, I'm afraid. But Stuart, hopefully you can...
Well, I hope so. My windfarthing is the whole 100. Yeah. That's what's really been challenging me. And valleys, penetrating into the centre of the 100. Yeah. And this one particular one coming round here is where we've got our...
Lovely.
You've got this shoulder sticking out. It's the perfect place to place a burial. In this special place as you come to this wooded alcove in the landscape. But if we look at what that also might be pointing to, I've used the word shrine quite carefully here, but is that the sort of place you might get for a 100 meeting place?
Yes, ticks all the boxes for that. A holy well, perhaps a holy beck, holy stream, and a natural amphitheatre structure, which would of course lend it to the kind of soundscape you want for an open-air meeting place.
So it's just possible that the central meeting place could have been in the field just next door to our Anglo-Saxon cemetery.
I wonder if it's worthwhile getting the metal detector just to flick over this and see what we can see. John?
In Trench 2, Jackie's hoping that some of the burials that we're uncovering might have grave goods that could help us to characterise the cemetery.
The cut goes up to there, but also it comes right the way down to here. I'm going to get out of the way because I've got steel toe cap boots on, so I don't want you picking.
Yeah, there's a positive signal, but it's definitely an iron signal.
Right.
It's quite long and thin, so I'm thinking you've got something that sort of.
Yeah, because the way you've got that high pitch peak was there. That's with, I think that might be the femur there, or one of the
just
things.
there.
So it's almost like this level, you know, sort of waist thigh level.
It's small, but it could also be being masked by the irons.
While you're here, do you think you can have a look at this where Romy was? So you can kind of stand in there, but you can see there's a bright orange there and a bright orange there, and a slightly dirtier orange in the middle, and that's the grave. So you can stand across there. You can stand there. Yeah.
It's quite long again.
That sounds quite high pitched.
We've got a non-ferrous, high-pitched.
Oh wow,
that
sounds quite interesting. That sounds to me, Romy, like you're going to have a really interesting day tomorrow.
I can't wait.
That's of interest, but that's a particular interest because it's not.
But you have to do the whole thing, not just that bit. Okay?
I'll bring my best digging.
Right. Okay, right. Thanks, John.
Good
Brilliant.
Step out. Thank you.
These burials have suffered so much plough damage that any grave goods surviving where they were buried would be incredibly valuable to our story. By the end of day 2, we've opened up 2 big trenches to look for our Windfarthing woman. The absence of any archaeology in Trench 1 and 3 suggests that Our Lady was deliberately set apart from the other graves we're finding in Trench 2.
This might be a cemetery, and there might be...
It's definitely a cemetery, absolutely definitely, but it might be quite a dense cemetery, which is really not what I was expecting, which is really nice. It's really nice to know that the Windfarthing lady was in the middle of a folk cemetery of people that were around her. And it's not just this trench. Obviously, we've got more to do further up the hill, but there's hints of more coming out there too. And in the northern field, we've got evidence of a structure both from the finds and beginning to come up, I think, from the geophysics. So it is all still quite tentative, and I'm very aware that we've only got 1 day left. But I don't think it's all been blitzed into nothingness by the plough.
So, one day left. Come on, let's go and get in the wall.
Yes, please.
Tomorrow we'll expand our investigation into the field next door to see if there was a Roman shrine here before Our Lady was interred. And her burial has inspired Sam to perform for us as the sun sets on day 2.
We've been spending a lot of time looking at the landscape and the forgotten features of this landscape, give us the setting of this wonderful burial. But there's another aspect to it that is often overlooked, that is the forgotten soundscape. What the sounds that were heard, an obituary she would have had. The traditional meaning for most ordinary people and for years after would be the poetry. And so looking at the old language and some of the words they would have used to describe the lady herself and indeed that beautiful pendant, I started listing a few things and then I thought, why don't I sort of string them together, try and simulate something of the Old English verse that would have been heard in this landscape at the time. What? With Worthing, Warfingerlanders, Eders Atherloo, Alfwees, Freo for Yipton and Winners for Yothinga, Thousandum Wintrum, and Threo Hundum. Nu thine banners Slappinger, in Bedignes Bibecca, Clafdia Good, Hring Roden. Bith art unrayon from earth grappa, Seo crafty, Sunners Lookingers. Who brooketh we, Dian Breost Sigaland, Saro Yimmers, Cinch in Golda, Yachen Stanas, Athelkunas, Area Watch, Wonder Smithers. Cunninga Weef, Drew Crafty, Alfshini Latcha, Edas Halig, Maytho Wendon, Mid Windham Farium, to Zara Huda on Hyovenum. To the worthy woman of Winfarthing.
So together we brought Time Team back, and now we're going to take Time Team to the next level. Help us achieve 10,000 ongoing members on Patreon.
It's day 3 of our dig in Winfarthing, where we're asking why a 7th century Anglo-Saxon lady was buried here with the highest quality gold and garnet jewellery.
That's
exquisite.
Yes.
We've discovered what appears to be a cemetery nearby, and we're hoping that 2 of the burials have some grave goods.
That sounds to me, Romy, like you're going to have a really interesting day tomorrow.
I can't wait.
We finished yesterday evening with that discovery of that burial site and raised lots of questions about why those people were buried in this landscape. And we're going to hope to find some answers in this adjacent field where we've found something which we think could be truly extraordinary. It's a beautiful morning, and Matt's still hoping to find the old excavation of the Winfarthing woman and signs of a ring ditch around the mound that might have marked her grave. Jackie and the team in Trench 2 are working through the tough soil to locate the source of the signals that the metal detector picked up last night.
It's really like digging concrete.
The key to understanding why the Anglo-Saxons chose this site to bury such an important woman might lie near the spring in the field next door. Good morning.
Hi, Carl.
So the team are putting in one more trench.
Another field, another day.
Absolutely. Well, we're here because we're trying to understand why the cemetery was put where it was, and also what would have been visible to people at the time of the Winfarthing lady's funeral. What would the atmosphere have been like? And we're specifically here because metal detecting in the past has shown that there's a concentration of finds around here. So John's put some geophysics in.
It was quite nice. We've got clear ditches and what appear to be large post sockets, and a complex of anomalies. And there's lots of possible interpretations for what we've got. We think there's a lot of Roman material here, so it could be something like a Roman bathhouse, because we're close to water source just over the hedge there.
And Philippa also raised another possibility, that the finds could indicate some kind of votive offerings. It's quite a tenuous possibility because they're also the kinds of personal items that might come off when you're putting your clothes on and taking them off for a bath, like bracelets and finger rings and so on. But it's something that we ought to bear in mind. It could also be that these two activities are using the same spring, you know, having a bath and making a votive offering, both use water.
The fact we appear to have these sort of anomalies.
These, what, apses?
Apses.
Yes.
Then you can have those on bathhouses.
You can have those on shrines, you can have those on churches. I mean, how far do we want to push this? But the odd thing is there's two of them, and there's that square end. It doesn't make a coherent building as yet.
So is this one deeply complex building, or is it multiple phases of building?
I think there could be two phases. We don't know which is earlier, so that's why we need to dig it.
But I think what's so important about this is that people seem to think that the Romans have in some way left and the Anglo-Saxons have in some way arrived as a new people into a completely clear landscape. And of course, that's absolutely ridiculous. There were people here all the time, and these structures were gradually crumbling and decaying and being reused and being changed, and we've got 5th century Anglo-Saxon items from this field, so it's a continuum. And to understand why Anglo-Saxons are using this, we have to understand the landscape immediately before. It's not a different thing, it's part of the same story.
So the new trench goes in looking for evidence of a bathhouse, a shrine, or something else entirely. And straight away, there are signs of buildings and traces of burning.
So what you got, Hilda?
Well, there's quite a lot of this stuff coming up. Do you think that could be plaster?
Could be plaster or baked clay.
Baked clay,
There's a lot of burning here, isn't there?
Yeah, there's loads of charcoal. There's quite a lot of CBM.
It's certainly structural or elements of structure, isn't there?
Yeah, kind of demolition,
Collapse, yeah.
demolition collapse stuff.
Oh, it's going to be good. No pressure. Oh, that charcoal line's really intriguing. Yeah.
Yeah, look, there's proper grain here.
Oh.
Ah,
That's lovely.
tracing all the way along the edge of this feature.
Oh. Nice.
Over in the cemetery in Trench 2, Jackie's been working on one of the burials where we detected a promising metal signal.
I mean, if you look here, I've just now uncovered there's a knife here. And I've got bone down here.
Oh, yeah.
But you can see how difficult it is to see the edges.
It's really difficult, especially with the bright sun on it as well.
Yeah, the sun's not really helping us, but this stuff over the top is absolutely rock solid.
Crikey.
So I think it would be helpful if we can get you to wet sieve that, because that'll break it up a little bit more, just to make sure that we're not missing anything.
Absolutely.
The knife is a great find, and we don't want to miss any other grave goods which could help to tell us about the people buried in this cemetery. Over the last 2 days, our test pits in the village of Winfarthing have revealed evidence of late Anglo-Saxon occupation, as well as some intriguing finds.
We put it in here because they were afraid that the gold would come off. How about that?
So quite often you get S-shaped buckles that you put on your belt.
Yeah.
But this has got quite a lot of detail on it. So
yeah, it looks like it's got little feathers or something on there.
yeah, I would like
leaves
to.
or something.
I don't think it's terribly old at the moment.
Okay.
Purely because actually there's so much of it still. It's still, you know, the copper alloys. It's not falling apart or anything. It's still quite solid.
Brilliant stuff.
Yeah, it was just sort of sticking out of the ground, like straight out. It's a good thing we didn't smoosh it with the shovel.
Well, this is
It's a lovely find, if a little later than the Anglo-Saxon pottery we found nearby, which is beginning to turn up in more gardens as we expand our survey away from the church.
Well, we're doing our best, Carenza. We've got 5 hairy guys here, as you can see. They're strapping lads and they've been working really hard, although most of them are new to this kind of thing.
And you're here, so you're the only ones that are at the other side of this road. So what have you got coming out of it?
Well, we're not getting a lot out of this context layer, to be honest, but I think most of it's geology, I think. But we think that's possibly Thetford ware.
Yeah, no, that looks very much like it, doesn't it? Now, and you say it's not much, but even just having one bit like that, and it's quite a big bit as well, and the breaks at the edges are quite sharp, so it's unlikely to have moved around very much.
This adds to the evidence that the Anglo-Saxons were here 200 years or so after the burial of Our Lady and the cemetery on the hill, where Romy's revealing what appears to be another knife which could help to date the burials.
Do you want to pick a little bit more of it so we can get an idea of what that is? It might be another knife.
Do you want the probe rover to see if it's...
I've got that, so it's not going to go anywhere.
See a grave when it's...
No, we're okay. I think it had just caught that edge of it, yeah, so... Yeah, it's not curving at the end, is it?
But this one here is...
No.
I think that's just staining.
That's just staining, yeah. Excellent stuff.
It's painstaking work. And Martin Carver, director of the Sutton Hoo Research Project, has joined the team for the day to lend a hand. So could you give me a sense of what we're looking at here?
I am trying to conjure a grave out of this unpromising piece of earth here, because it's got a blotchy side here to it, and it's the edges aren't clear, but it's possible that that will turn out to be a grave.
And are they all in the same orientation?
Interestingly not. Interestingly not. So that's diagonal. This is, I don't know what this is, but this one is definitely east-west here.
Is that different periods?
I think so, yes. I think the most likely explanation is that there'd be a cemetery here where people buried in this orientation, and then the east-west are sort of more likely to come later,
yes,
because we're dealing with the early Middle Ages, and in the 7th century they like to be east-west. So I think that's, bearing in mind the finds that have already come out of here,
yes,
rich finds, beautiful rich finds of the 7th century, I think that sounds as though it might be an explanation, but it's pretty early days, and whether there's enough left here,
yes,
to put the story together, that's the big problem, I think. It's a huge challenge.
It's a race against time to find out what we can before the burials disappear. But the orientation of the graves suggests the cemetery was in use for centuries. And this tallies with the finds that Tom has discovered.
We start in the 5th century here, and they range from something that's reasonably complete, like that, and you can see that this is a long brooch where the pin would have come down and been clipped into there, and it's lost its 2 side knobs. These things normally break up, so that all you find are the knobs.
And we've got lots of knobs and blobs, haven't we?
Yep.
Can you tell how many burials these might represent then?
Well, it's tricky to say, but you can get them down to a kind of irreducible minimum, because people don't tend to have more, women don't tend to have more than 2 brooches per grave. So I've put pairs of brooches together. You know, these 2 could possibly have come from the same brooch. So looking at that principle, we've got 6 graves from this group which have a kind of coherence. So you could call this is early Anglo-Saxon. It might be easier to call it migration.
Yeah, I was going to say that migration period, when we think there's a lot of movement happening in Britain.
And then moving around, we have this kind of big disjuncture here, the gap between the migration period and the conversion period, and this is all represented by this one brooch.
So this is only one brooch here that
yes,
we've got?
Shattered into 4 bits. That is a disc brooch, a flat silver gilded disc brooch, which is entirely different in style. After this big break, I tend to call that the conversion period, because that's the big thing that's happening, the big political event. We've got Christianity, kings, and so on. And the material culture is very different. We have something like these very small, simple buckles. It's a very simple style of dress, and you'll notice that there are no brooches in here. There should be a few pendants, but they are at Norwich Castle Museum who have acquired them. So we're missing our pendants. What we have, the bronze bowls that are being put in graves later on. So we've got an escutcheon from a hanging bowl. So that would have held a ring onto a hanging bowl so that the bronze bowl could be suspended.
And in the migration period, all these brooches were associated with women, weren't they?
Yes.
But here we seem to have some objects that might be more male.
Well, maybe. There's nothing to stop a hanging bowl being buried with a man, but they're buried with women too. The single item that represents a man on this table, there's just one. And it's this little sword pommel.
Not very impressive, is it?
Well, it would have been, you know, it would have been from the top of a sword grip, so we'd have a nice big sword blade.
I can imagine that now.
Yes, yes, and it's just a tiny little bit, like they all are, all of these tiny little bits that represent just plough-smashed
fragments.
Fragments, exactly, of an enormous material culture, until we come to this point, which is the end of the grave good habit. And we've just got that single dress pin from the 8th or 9th century.
It's because by this time they're all Christian, aren't they? And they're not burying objects in their graves.
No, and you've put that quite well, because they are Christians and they are not burying with grave goods. The two things are not necessarily related.
The finds Tom discovered with his metal detector could have been moved across the field by the plough, so we don't know which burials they came from. But finds that are still where they were placed in their graves should give us more information about the individuals.
Can you talk me through it? What are we actually looking
Right, OK, well you can see I have got the outline of the grave cut here, and it's starting to show up over there. I've got a femur coming down here. I think that's a bit of tibia down there, and there we've got a small knife.
Wow.
That's the sort of tang end of it, so that's the blade, that's the back of it, and that's the tang end that would have been the handle.
So that knife would have been buried, perhaps attached to the hip of whoever this was?
Yeah, I mean, they'd probably have had a belt that the knife would be hanging from, in some kind of sheath. We have got in situ remains, we have got artefacts with them, and that will enable us to do a little bit of dating for it as well. Although knives are fairly ubiquitous throughout the Anglo-Saxon period, they were a sort of general purpose artefact that everybody would carry their knife. Whether you were male or female, you would have a knife.
And Romy, do you mind if I step into the...
You're right just there, yeah.
Just here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
It's all right.
What are we looking at?
So we've got our grave cut coming up and round here. This finds bags are just hiding and looking after some bone that we've got coming up, but really interesting is we've got another knife in here, if you can see that there.
How wonderful.
And we've also got a piece of copper alloy here as well, with the kind of bluey green tinge to it.
Is that a pin or is that a piece of decoration?
So it's definitely a piece of copper wire. We're not sure entirely what it is yet. It's a bit too small to be a clothespin, but we'll just have to find out.
The knives were carefully cleaned after the dig, and traces of horn handles and leather from a sheath were discovered. Bear's reconstructions can go into my virtual museum alongside the buckle and the sword pommel, which Helen thinks could all have come from the same male grave. He would have died a few decades before the Wynfarthing woman was buried here, with her beautiful grave goods.
Is that going to show up against the black background?
You'd be surprised. Are these laid out in time order?
Yes, yes.
As well as the virtual museum, we're creating a timeline to help to navigate through the story. Because the finds have a range from early medieval back to Romano-British.
Well, we'll enter it and then we'll pop the date in. So.
Anglo-Saxon cemeteries are often found near sites that were venerated by the Romans. So a building like a shrine in our new trench would make complete sense.
Whoa!
Big old...
That's a big place.
That's a pad stone or something, isn't it? Okay, we'll go back.
There it was.
Some more flutile.
Yeah. And burnt flutile.
Yeah, it's burnt as well.
It's burnt.
I like the Romans, they left so much stuff.
Dan is keen to get Helen's take on the S-shaped buckle from the test pits.
These are really interesting little things, aren't they? Because you're probably not old enough, but I had a snake belt in the early 1970s, and they had exactly this kind of thing. But these are birds rather than snake. What do we normally date these to? 17th century going into the 18th. I mean, they've got that continuity right up to the 1970s snake belts. I don't think they ever go out of use because they're so practical.
That's not bad. I think our test pit volunteers will be happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really nice thing to find because you can immediately understand what it was used for. Yeah. Lovely. Brilliant.
Back in the Roman trench, there's a first hint of a possible wall emerging.
Looks like you got another stone there come out, Hilda.
Yeah, do you think this could be in situ?
Yeah, I think so. It would make sense with John's geophysics that there should be some sort of, high magnetic anomalies, or whether that's a wall or something attached to a structure. So that obviously came up while we were stripping. We've been a bit more careful in this area. We're starting to get a number of large flints potentially reveal a feature here.
Yeah.
It's looking a bit wall-like, isn't it?
Yeah, wall foundation-y.
Foundation would be interesting.
This wall tallies with a feature in the geophys. But is there anything to suggest it's a wall of a shrine? It's difficult to tell from the ceramic finds coming out of the trench.
We have pieces of hypercoarse tile, box flue tile, with the combed keying so that the plaster sticks firmly to the surface and can then be painted and decorated. We have the tegula, so you'd have another flange along here, and then the semicircular imbrex goes over the top to provide a waterproof joint.
Yeah.
The remains of dinner,
The last meal?
oyster shells. They've come a good distance in from the coast, haven't they?
So we are looking at a solid building.
Yes, definitely.
Flint walls, foundations, and that's what we're seeing here.
Yes.
The rubdite walls. I really want to see one of these large pits. Have we started to see these pits yet?
There might be something just coming up over there. It's looking a bit darker, but I'm not sure they're down far enough quite yet.
I really want to see what these are, whether they are big post pit supports or whether they're actually pits, rubbish pits. Well, there wouldn't be rubbish pits, would they?
Well, they might.
Well, I suppose they might if they're totally different phase.
This building is a puzzle. It's not the right shape for a villa or a farmstead, but we've found hypercoarse, domestic pottery, and potential votive offerings such as coins and jewellery. So what's going on here? As ever, Stuart has a theory.
Yeah, there's a very good parallel, I think, for this, although it's on a much larger scale, is at Groundwell Ridge in Swindon. Yeah. It's a spa site, it's not a villa, and it evolves over a long period of time, but people come there to bathe, to take the waters for its healing properties and its magic properties as well.
So would that account for all of the breadth of artefacts we've been finding in that field? Because the detectorists have been finding all sorts of stuff, haven't they?
People are coming here, and it's not just coming here to worship or to bathe. Perhaps they have to be fed, and they have to be watered and looked after for a few days. So they'll be dropping things, there'll be lots of other artefacts which are not quite domestic, but give a hint that people are spending a bit of time here, but not very long probably. So I think we've got a really, really complex and interesting site. In Groundwell Ridge, for instance, it's termed a pilgrim sanctuary, even in its scheduling. So these are important places in the landscape.
So the Windfarthing Pilgrim Sanctuary. I like that. I can't say it, but I like it.
And this ties in with the field name that Stuart spotted on day 2. And perhaps this helps to explain why the site was of such significance that centuries later it became the central meeting place for the Anglo-Saxons and the burial site for the Windfarthing woman. Derek's been analysing his XRF results from her grave goods and he's noticed some oddities.
This one. And the gold itself was pretty typical for Anglo-Saxon gold, around 60 to 70%, alloyed with silver. But there was an area down here that was really high in iron, which is peculiar because there's obviously no iron there.
Yeah, well, that is interesting because it is, if you go back to the original picture, Looking at my excavation photograph of it, I mean, this is as it's coming out of the ground, we've always noticed that it's got this irony colour over the top of it. But
I mean, is this a pin?
Well, yes. Now, looking at it now, it feels slightly embarrassing that we can see it on the photo, but we didn't notice it while we were excavating. That is quite an odd thing to have a pin overlying a pendant.
I was thinking about that, and we always look at grave goods like this, and we imagine them being kind of telling the story of this person in the grave. But could this have been for her? This was linked to her, and it wasn't for everyone else. It was for her.
Yes, well, there's a kind of ambivalent relationship with grave goods in the 7th century because it's a time when grave goods are becoming, in a way, almost less fashionable. Some people have loads, some people have absolutely none, and some people have them, but they're in a coffin, enclosed. And I haven't seen anything that suggests a cloak wrapping them up, but that would enable you to have your cake and eat it. And so maybe you're right, maybe this was concealed, or maybe she had her full dress on, and then at the point of burial, it was closed up.
Yeah, maybe. But we know these kind of artefacts have biographies, don't they? We can see that in some of the repairs. And if we look at this one in particular, it's one of my favourite pieces, this one, because it's so beautiful. This was one of our richest pieces in terms of gold content. It's sort of around the 80 to 90% mark. But on the back here, as you can see, this small repair is a much less pure gold, so it's been repaired and refreshed. We shouldn't underestimate the skill of the Anglo-Saxon goldsmith in these as well, because I was looking at some comparative data, and the Staffordshire hoard, for example, there's evidence that the smiths were actually enriching the surface to make the poorer quality gold look like better gold.
Essentially, they kind of try to corrode and leach out the copper and the silver by using kind of acids and salt. And...
So actual chemistry to make these things look more gold, to kind of bluff them in a way, to bring out the gold, which is incredible.
I do think that pendant has a curiously pitted surface, not just on the scan, but in reality. So maybe that had been treated in that way.
Now, the last thing we did, which I know is perhaps getting more interesting as we've studied it more, is the bowl.
The main thing I want to know about that bowl is where was it made? Because if it's a brass, there's the argument that it was made in the Byzantine world, in the Mediterranean, and it's been brought here. If it's not, well, I'm expecting it to be brass.
Okay.
Is it brass?
No.
Oh.
No. It is a classic tin bronze.
Oh. Right.
So where does that put it? Is that make it more local?
Well, that makes it kind of more interesting, because this is a very difficult bowl to parallel. The only parallel I've found has been another hitherto very odd bowl from Broomfield in Essex. And so maybe this means that there's some kind of East Anglian workshop making these. It just shows how very unusual this grave is, as if we needed any more.
It's pulling things in from all over, isn't it?
The contents of this extraordinary bowl might reveal even more about Our Lady.
As I started going through this, I started finding all this brown material.
The organic material is surprisingly well preserved amongst the fragments of the bronze.
It's unusually thin, isn't it? And it reminds me more of the kind of very fine copper alloy bodies of the hanging bowls, like the ones from Sutton Hoo, for example.
Right, yeah.
And the copper in there would also help preserve the organic stuff, which might explain how you've got that preservation in that spot inside a copper alloy structure like that. The Royal Lyre of Sutton Hoo had fallen into a copper alloy bowl, and then the hanging bowl had fallen onto the top of them, so the top of the lyre was actually squashed between two copper alloy surfaces, and that's why you've got 2/3 of it preserved, and the rest sticking out in the acid sands completely disappeared.
See, this has completely blown my mind. So the next stage, I guess, is to try and get an identification of exactly what species this is, if it's possible. Because that would be really interesting, because we might be able to tell something more about medicinal properties.
Yeah, and it would give us potentially tangible evidence of her status as perhaps some sort of healer, if you can see something medicinal. For example, some of the bark reminded me a little bit of willow, which of course, I don't know when they discovered the healing properties of willow bark, but it's the basis to aspirin.
Right, of course.
So,
well, honestly, this has been one of the most amazing things that I've discovered in a long, long time.
The contents of this bowl would not have been accidental and might help us understand why the Windfarthing woman was so important. This was a time of epic poems, depicting warrior kings like Beowulf and queens like Judith. It was a time when Our Lady would almost certainly have mixed with powerful women. Women who achieved legendary status like the Frankish queen, St. Baltild.
Balderhild, as she should be called in Old English, who starts off actually as an Anglo-Saxon lady. She's captured in war. She becomes a slave, probably a sex slave actually, marries the prince who falls in love with her, later becomes the queen, king mother of later kings of the Franks, and later, probably for political reasons, she's bundled off to the nunnery. And it's there that we have preserved as one of the great relics of the monastery in which she lived, just west of Paris, a beautiful embroidered chemise, a little light white tunic, embroidered by her own hand with images showing the kind of beautiful pendant jewellery and necklaces that she would have worn during her time as a senior lady, a princess and queen. And these show perfectly a beautifully bejewelled cross with garnet inlays and smaller little pendants hanging from that made of the crystal garnets that we see here as well. And so it's absolutely wonderful to have this sort of contemporary image of how the jewellery would have looked in its full glory.
St. Balderhild's story gives us an understanding of just how precious this jewellery must have been to Our Lady. We're nearing the end of our time in Windfarthing exploring her story, but back in the village, the test pits have started to hit solid archaeology.
Aha, so we've got something really exciting in the bottom of the test pit here. Jeff, that's what, 70 centimetres?
Yes, around about that. Yeah, we've been hacking through this really heavy clay for ages, and then we suddenly appear to have come down onto what looks like a cobbled surface. Yeah.
Yep, no, I think you're absolutely right. It does to me as well. And as you say, might be picking up the other side of the pit. Maybe you've got a feature cutting through it, not entirely clear. Or perhaps you've got quite a lot of charcoal just in the central bit there. That could even be a post hole maybe going through it. But we're right on top of it. It looks like it's some sort of yard surface where someone's thrown down the load of cobbles just to create a surface to walk on. What sort of finds have you had from immediately on top of it?
We've had very little, but well, we've got it here, in fact, a couple of bits of bone, but I think we've got some possible Thetford ware.
Yep, I think you are probably right there. We need to get it washed to get that confirmed, but it looks very much like that Thetford ware, so that's 850 to 1100 AD. Could be pre-conquest, could be just post-Norman conquest. In terms of what to do about that, the issue here is that we were thinking we'd take this cobbled surface up, and then just as we were looking at this, we were called over here to this test pit, same garden nearby, and look at this. So in here, we've got, well, this again, it's completely different to what you had above, isn't it, Doug?
Yes, it was quite an unexciting pit, but the last half hour, we started to sort of see this delineation here.
I mean, this is amazing, really, because you've got all that chalk. You haven't had chalk like that in a dense layer at all further up. You can see it's not there in the section. You can see just where your feet are there. You can see where it's appearing in the section behind you. It looks like there's a lot of mortar in with it. It looks like the footings of a wall, perhaps even a stone flint-built wall, something like that. What it feels like here is we've actually got a late Anglo-Saxon, possibly Saxo-Norman complex here, where we've got a building and we've got a yard, and we're just adjacent to the church. And so, Jem, and I would have said in your garden, it looks like the hypothesis we'd want to test if we had more time was, is this an Anglo-Saxon hall that typically are very close to churches because the lords are getting their sort of authority from their connection with the church. You'd expect an enclosure around it. They have a wall, they have a gate, they have a tower with a bell and all that sort of thing. We know that from documents. And I think what you've got is that here. You've got another 6 weeks, and don't mind the rest of your garden being opened up.
It's a great result for our test pit teams. And Paul has spotted something else.
There is, however, a joker in the pack.
which is test pit 5.
Ah, the other side of the stream.
The side of the street. The bottom 2 layers in test pit 5 have both produced late Saxon pottery and nothing later. Now, there's only one sherd in each layer, but if you look at it, it's a really nice sherd. It's big, it's fresh, it's way bigger than anything else we're getting in any of the other test pits.
And it's quite sharply broken. Yeah, we were talking about that when it came out the pit. Yeah.
It's very fresh. I mean, now it looks like late Saxon activity, it really does. So it might be that test pit 5 is actually the site of the original late Saxon core of the village.
So our community dig has certainly produced the goods, and we now have real evidence that Winfarthing was a Saxon settlement, albeit at a later date than the burials a few fields away. Back in the Roman trench, we're into the late afternoon, and it's all hands on deck. We've identified the wall line on the geophys and a ditch, as well as some post bits.
Yeah, that's it, That looks like brown coming through, doesn't it?
And there are more shrine-like finds coming up.
Okay, I'll take a look and see if I can identify it. Let's see if I can get it out the bag.
Including some more coins to add to the collection.
Oh wow, this is really well preserved. I can identify this perfectly. That's the Emperor Theodosius I. And just have a look at the reverse and see if I can narrow down the date. Okay, if you look really carefully, you can maybe see a person walking left. That's a Victory. Just. And you can see Victoria, maybe, along that side,
Yes,
with the
yeah,
Eye of Faith.
I can.
So that's a Victoria AVGGG reverse. And those are only minted in 3 places, Arles, Lyon and Trier, between 388 and 395.
Well, that's a nice tight one.
One of the latest coins from the site, I think. But basically the coins that are coming off the spoil here and from the top of the trench are all dating from the late 3rd to 4th century. So it fits in with the other metal detecting finds that Tom's had from this field already.
Very nicely, yes.
Although we've only scratched the surface of this intriguing building, the evidence is still pushing us toward the idea that this was a Roman shrine or sanctuary. The geophys suggests it was rebuilt several times, and we found evidence of flint foundations supporting a wooden structure with a heavy roof. Pits inside the building may have been for beams supporting the roof, and some could have been ovens preparing offerings for the gods. There's evidence it was heated, and the geophys suggests that there were gardens surrounding the buildings. And just before we pack up, there's the tiniest bit of hope that we might have found the grave of the Winfarthing woman, which Helen excavated in 2015.
You finally found it.
Well, I reckon, why isn't that it?
It's the right size, it's the right shape. Now I can see it against the natural. It does look very much like the backfill of our grave, because our grave's fill had none of this white flecky chalk in it, but the whole lot with the topsoil was piled back in as a mix. So I don't see why this isn't our grave.
Well, this is where the GPS point said it was. We're north of that ditch, which is where the plan said. This is what we got distracted from on the first day. So we're now saying at 5 o'clock on day 3, that's it.
I don't mind encountering this right at the end of day 3. I think it's a win that we've got it at all.
At least now, we can be pretty certain that we haven't missed any further evidence from the grave of the Winfarthing lady.
Gosh, Helen, what a few days. It's been an emotional roller coaster. And what do you think we've learned?
Well, what we've learned about the Winfarthing lady is so much. We've found out from her bones that she's had a long life and she's been wearing her jewellery throughout that long life. And we also know from the jewellery that she's conscious of Christianity and that she's hugely conscious of her power structures of the time. She's part of those power structures.
And Stuart, does that concur with the things that you've found in the landscape?
It does. It echoes it. She was buried in a very special place in a landscape setting that may have been venerated for generations before her from prehistory. It's all about the water and the springs that are present here.
And that sense of this being a special place, is that something that you found, Corinne?
Well, it's interesting. The test pits in the village have given us the next chapter in the story, where on the stream further down there's perhaps some of the earlier settlement that might just have been the same period that she was alive in, but actually a couple of hundred years later somebody reorganises the landscape, the beliefs, the way that's expressed, and builds the church and their hall immediately adjacent to that, and perhaps memory of our Windfarthing Lady is lost as the church is built and the community takes its next step through time.
Oh. Yes, but what's really remarkable about this place, though, is the Windfarthing woman was the most important grave in this cemetery, so it was probably dug the deepest, and that's why it survived. All the other people in this cemetery, all the rest of her community, were buried in slightly shallower graves that we have found, but we've only found the very bottom of them. And modern agriculture has removed everything but her, virtually, it seems. And this is not just happening in Windfarthing, it's happening in village after village across the country, that we are wrecking our Anglo-Saxon cemeteries with modern agricultural practice. And we've got to think, do we want to do that, or shouldn't we value what we've got before it vanishes?
Thankfully, Tom discovered the burial of this important woman before her story disappeared. Naomi continued her investigations after the dig and managed to identify the contents of the strange bowl. Foxgloves, horsetail, blushing lanterns, bracken and apple or pear stems, plants with healing properties, creating an attractive display. They flower in early summer, revealing the season she was buried. The bark was from birch trees, also known for its medicinal properties. And incredibly, enough wood survived to suggest that she was buried in a coffin or a wood-lined grave. The ceremony would have involved poetry, music and feasting, as Our Lady's body was placed with treasured objects, displaying her status as a member of the ruling classes and maybe as a healer. And perhaps a cloth was drawn over her in the last moment, and her delicate features were hidden from view, set apart from the other burials in the landscape around her.
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses, and behind-the-scenes insights.